Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kelly O'Donnell in Washington, where the Trump administration is racing to calm growing anxiety over soaring energy prices as the war with Iran intensifies after Israel and Iran exchange strikes on critical energy infrastructure in the region. These were the stunning images out of Iran after Israel launched an attack on South Pars, one of the world's largest natural gas fields, which is shared by both Iran and Qatar. You can see the large fires burning as plumes of black smoke billowed into the air. Iran responding, launching retaliatory strikes on energy infrastructure across the Gulf region, hitting a refinery in Saudi Arabia, an energy facility in Qatar, and 2 oil refineries in Kuwait. President Trump is also reacting to dueling strikes, posting on social media that the U.S. did not know about the Israeli attack on South Pars, while also threatening to, quote, massively blow up the South Pars gas field if Iran carried out any more strikes on Qatar. However, a U.S. official familiar with the information telling NBC News Israel did inform the U.S. they were planning to strike that facility. Speaking in the Oval Office today while hosting the Japanese prime minister, the president said he told Israel to stop strikes on Iran's energy fields.
Have you talked to Prime Minister Netanyahu about attacking the oil and gas fields?
Yeah, I did. I told him don't do that, and he won't do that. We didn't discuss. You know, we do. We're independent. We get along great. It's coordinated, but on occasion he'll do something, and if I don't like it, and so we're not doing that anymore.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also speaking to reporters late today, saying Israel acted alone when striking the oil field, but not answering the question about whether President Trump knew or had approved the strike. As for whether the U.S. and Israel are aligned on their goals for the war, Prime Minister Netanyahu and Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard offered 2 different perspectives.
Together in close coordination with President Trump, the close coordination between America and Israel, our militaries, our intelligence services, we're achieving goals in lightning speed.
The objectives that have been laid out by the president are different from the objectives that have been laid out by the Israeli government.
Meanwhile, energy prices are surging in the wake of those strikes. Crude oil settling at around $96, up 43% since the start of the war. Gas and diesel prices also continue to tick up as the war moves on. Despite that, President Trump trying to downplay the economic consequences of the war. Here's a little bit more of what he said today in the Oval Office.
Iran is a serious threat to the world, to the Middle East and to the world. And everybody agrees with me. I think virtually every country agrees with me on that. So I wanted to put out that fire. And I said, you know, if I do that, oil prices will go up, the economy will go down a little bit. I thought it would be worse, much worse, actually. I thought there was a chance it could be much worse. It's not bad, and it's going to be over with pretty soon.
As the administration looks for more ways to bring prices down, Treasury Secretary Bessent said the U.S. could remove some of its sanctions on Iran.
In the coming days, we may unsanction the Iranian oil that's on the water. It's about 140 million barrels. So depending on how you count it, that's 10 days to 2 weeks of supply that the Iranians had been pushing out. That would have all gone to China. In essence, we will be using the Iranian barrels against the Iranians to keep the price down for the next 10 or 14 days as we continue this campaign.
And joining me now is NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake, NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube, and NBC News chief international correspondent Keir Simmons. Welcome all. Garrett, let me start with you. There's been a lot of concern that we've heard about within the White House about these rising prices. Give us sort of a snapshot of where you think that stands today.
Well, look, I think the White House is clearly aware of this problem, and they're willing to do things that might otherwise be politically unpalatable to try to address it. They've made several attempts to loosen sanctions on Russian oil in particular to get it back on the market to try to keep prices down. And that comment from Scott Bessent kind of cuts both ways. loosening restrictions on Iranian oil when we're at war with them seems counterintuitive, but it also speaks to the fact that the president's had to punt that big summit he planned to do with China. Getting that Iranian oil back to China might keep things a little more copacetic with the Chinese. The administration has found themselves now, if they didn't know at the start, in the middle of a mess as relates to the global energy market. It is global. It doesn't necessarily relate just to American production. And you're seeing them test different ways to, if not actually lower the price of oil, at least be caught trying to do so for the benefit of American consumers and voters.
We saw the president sitting alongside the Japanese prime minister today. In the early days of this conflict, there was talk that Japan was one of the countries that he was urging to come help deal with the Strait of Hormuz. Any sense of where that stands now?
It's hard to say for sure. The president seemed to be, pushing the prime minister to say something in that meeting, saying several times that Japan was stepping up or would step up, sort of suggesting that they should step up. He kept using that language in different terms. The Japanese constitution is essentially pacifist after World War II. It is very difficult for them, in keeping with their own laws and constitutions, to deploy military assets anywhere outside their own territorial waters. It's unclear if there were any commitments made today in that meeting or afterwards. We're now several hours hence, and there's been nothing announced by the White House.
There were a number of moments today where knowing history would have been very helpful in the interactions there and the body language we could see. We also have seen some reporting, and it appeared that Secretary Hegseth seemed to confirm it today, that the Pentagon will ask Congress for as much as $200 billion to fund the ongoing operations and replenish supplies. Do you sense that the administration's ready to unveil a justification for that, to really outline the request?
Well, the president gave a little bit of a preview of what that might look like today, talking again about how elite American weaponry is and suggesting that our stockpiles need to be topped up, not just for this conflict, but for the future. That matches his rhetoric, at least, about the state of the war and the state of munitions that we're using. But it may not sell on Capitol Hill. I mean, Kelly, you know this well. It feels to me like that $200 million number is perhaps an opening offer for discussions that could take quite a while with Congress. Pretty evenly divided on this issue.
Garrett, we thank you for that. Let me turn to Courtney now. And one of the questions today is, was the U.S. aware of, did it give any tacit approval for the big strike that Israel carried out? What is your reporting telling you?
Yeah, and we heard from President Trump first on Truth Social, where he said that the U.S. didn't know that that was going to happen, but that Israel wasn't going to do it again unless Iran were to retaliate here. What we're told, according to a U.S. official familiar with this, is that, in fact, the U.S. was aware that that Israel was planning to carry out this strike. And the reason that this is such a big deal is not just the fact that Israel struck this facility, this very critical facility, oil and gas facility, is that Iran retaliated, striking a number of different facilities in the region, including one in Qatar. It's really caused a lot of concern and people being upset in the region about this. Now, the big question is, what will happen next? Will Israel actually follow through and not strike more oil and gas facilities? Will Iran escalate even further? That's what everyone's watching to see. And it comes, as we've been talking about forever, gas prices are very high. This only will make them rise higher.
And do you get the sense that, based on your reporting, and then when the president says there's coordination, does that rise all the way to his level, or is it the Pentagon is informed in advance of an operation like that?
It's hard to know, and it could also be that it's CENTCOM that's informed of it, or the Combined Air Operations Center known as the KAOC. It could be all of those things. But and it's hard to know when the military will say, we should probably let the president know about this or not. We don't have a really good sense of his briefing schedule, of how often they're keeping him updated on the ins and outs of this war. And I only point to one thing as evidence of that is he was very upset when the Wall Street Journal, Reuters, I believe, first reported that there were a number of U.S. aircraft that had been damaged in an Iranian strike early on. He read that in the press rather than being told about it. So we don't have a really good sense of exactly what he's being told at this point.
That's interesting. Now, this pledge from Israel, as we understand it today, of holding off from additional strikes, is that going to create tension between the U.S. and Israel? Does that put them out of alignment?
What's very clear is no matter how this war started with the U.S. and Israel together, their strategic goals have have separated. And
that's notable, right on its face.
Absolutely. And I will say the U.S. goals keep shifting. So now we keep hearing about the military goals, and those have actually remained somewhat the same, and that is going after the ballistic missiles and the drones. And sometimes they talk about the nuclear program, sometimes they don't. But Israel is really focused on regime change in Iran. And we don't hear that as much from the United States. So we don't really know what the U.S. political goals in Iran are right now. We are focused more on the military goals. So it's not there's a potential for a huge crossroads here at some point when the U.S. really finishes carrying out some of these military objectives and is able to really take care of a lot of these Iranian threats. If Israel wants to keep going to get rid of the regime, is the U.S. going to have to keep in this war as well? I mean, there's going to be a crossroads at some point where that happens.
And are you seeing any evolution in the plans for U.S. boots on the ground? You've reported about some units that are moving to the area. We heard the president say today he's not going to do that. How do you put those two things together?
I mean, the more we get into this Strait of Hormuz continuing to be closed or at least very inaccessible to most commercial traffic, I find it difficult to see a scenario where the U.S. doesn't put boots on the ground. I don't know how they will reopen it in any short order without some sort of a military intervention here. We don't exactly know what that's going to look like. The president keeps giving the same response, including again today, saying, well, I don't think I'm going to do that, but I wouldn't tell you if I was going to anyway. So the reality is we just don't know.
That has become his reflexive answer. Let me turn now to Keir, who is in the region. He's in Saudi Arabia, and I know you've been tracking a lot of the developments there, and obviously the region is hot. What can you tell us about what officials are saying about these strikes and how, yet again, it has expanded to partners in the region?
Yeah, Kelly, they're worried, they're angry, they're frustrated, all of those things. And when you talk to the Saudi Arabian government here, as we do, what you get from them is a sense that they are putting aside questions over how this started, who's responsible. But what they are saying is that Iran's behavior is frustrating, actually has them furious, and not least because in the past 24 hours, this meeting, emergency meeting of foreign ministers from around the region was held here in the capital, Riyadh, and there were missiles from Iran. We heard the boom. We saw the get to a safe place alerts on our phones. We heard all that while we were seeing ministers walking around the hotel lobby. And then I managed to ask the Saudi foreign minister about it. Take a listen.
To me, it was clear that the attack today was timed to coincide with this meeting in order to attempt, I don't know, to intimidate those present, to send home the message that Iran will not stop. All I can say is we were not intimidated. So the reality is any re-engagement with Iran, this conflict will end at some point. But I have to tell you, what little trust there was before has completely been shattered.
The piece of that, Kelly, that people should really pay attention to is that effectively what he's saying there is that this region is very close to the point of no return, where it becomes impossible to re-engage with an Iran that might still have missiles or drones or the ability to effectively close the Strait of Hormuz. In other words, this has to be finished. And again, the overriding question with all of the conversations you're having there is how do you get to the point where there is an outcome that these allies and partners of the U.S. and the Trump administration is satisfied with?
These are some of the dominoes that happen when you cannot predict all of the consequences of war. Do you get a sense from the conversations you're having that urgency to see it be concluded, how is that defined in time? Is that weeks, as we've heard President Trump sometimes talk about, or do they see this spilling into a longer term?
Well, I think they would like to see a conclusion quickly, but they also now are increasingly saying, the governments here, in the GCC, the Arab governments, the Islamic governments, are increasingly saying, we need to see the right conclusion. And just think about this in terms of a timeline. There are reports from Doha, from Qatar, that the strikes by Iran on the gas facilities there that are crucial to the world economy, that the repairs to that may take years. Now, that is a serious impact on the world economy and an inflationary impact. So already it's too late to conclude this without any repercussions. But the repercussions continue to escalate. And again, though, I'm sensing, and it does depend on which government here you speak to. Oman, for example, is much more interested in trying, as it says, to help the US get out of this effectively. It does depend which government you speak to, but increasingly, my sense is that they need to see the right conclusion to this, not just a quick conclusion to it, from their perspective.
Well, Keir, you are in the right place to help us understand this. Thank you so much for your reporting. And now I'm going to turn to more on how the war is affecting the energy markets. And we're joined by energy industry analyst John Kilduff, founding partner of Again Capital. So you've heard our discussion. If the U.S. goes ahead and hits one of these gas fields and oil infrastructure, as the president has threatened, what would the impact be on global energy markets?
It would be another escalation, and good day to you. Another escalation that is almost unimaginable. I mean, this most recent attack, again, upped the ante. And just when you think the ante can't be raised anymore, it happens again. I will say the Iranian gas production out of the Pars field is mostly for domestic consumption. So as far as upending the global supply, it doesn't necessarily have the impact it does if you're hitting the Qatari portion of the South Par fields. But at this point, we're watching all this very, very closely in terms of what the balance is going to be. I will say that the damage estimates and the repair estimates might be a little overblown. They generally exaggerate the amount of time it would take to get those sort of operations back online. I don't think it would take much more than really a year to a year and a half, rather than the 2 to 4 that I'm hearing bandied about in the marketplace.
And we even, in our last report, heard 3 to 5. And so that time piece is an important part of this. And you're suggesting that it wouldn't be as long, even if there's ongoing conflict?
Oh, no, the conflict has to stop. The strait has to get secured. What we're focusing on here is this next 2-week period. The military seems to be indicating that this whole operation was a 4 to 6 week plan. That the strait was not the top priority, which we're all learning the hard way, but it is now, and it will be. I mean, you hear the administration officials, all hands on deck, including Secretary Bessent, talk about this, and they're all using this 2-week sort of time period. So let's see what kind of force they can muster to secure the transit of the Strait of Hormuz, because that's where it's all going to be. It's hard to imagine that there wouldn't be some kind of required U.S. military footprint on the ground in Iran, along the shoreline at least, to be able to secure the strait. But this is what we're going to be learning in the coming days. And I'll tell you, the market reaction has been somewhat moderate. We did see oil prices decline a bit here today on the idea floated that we could unsanction the Iranian floating storage, the oil that's on tankers right now, as the Secretary Bessent said as well. That would represent a chunk of supply that would help ease really what's developing into a crisis and shortages in Asia in particular.
So even though those sanctions were meant to be punitive to the regime, it sounds like you're describing that would sort of release the valve a bit and help to adjust some of the strain on the global market. Is that what you think?
Yes, I mean, it's a Band-Aid for an acute problem that we're facing. It's not a fix. There is nothing anyone can do to fix this situation in the short term. No matter how you slice and dice it, alternative pipelines, you name it, in terms of trying to get oil out of the Gulf region in any way, shape, or form, you're still talking about 10 million barrels a day at least of production and supply to the global market that's offline. And we can't make that up anywhere, no how. But for now, I will tell you that the oil market is pricing in an end to this, a liberation, if you will, of the strait sooner rather than later. A lot of us have circled April 1st on our calendars to see where we're at. But after that period, once we get into April, and now we're several more weeks into this, and there's no resolution seemingly close, that's when you're really going to see oil prices ramp up, and that's when you're going to start to see the shortages of supply hit the market.
And dare I remind you that if you circled April 1st, that's April Fool's Day. We hope that's not the case. The president talks about the fact the U.S. does not rely on the product coming through the Strait of Hormuz. Does that make any difference, given all of the supply issues that you described?
Well, look, we still import about 6 to 7 million barrels of crude oil per day into the United States, mostly from Canada, and the additional liberation of the Venezuelan oil that was also desanctioned recently, for lack of a better word, if that's a word, helped here as well. It is now. But no, but it is now. Thank you. So that April 1st date, bad too. But what I was going to say is that we are energy dominant. People talk about us being energy independent. We're not that. But we're certainly not energy insulated. Okay, this is a global market, and I will tell you that our barrels of crude oil that are being exported along the Gulf Coast will reflect just the premium and the security premium of the global marketplace very shortly, because those ships in the Gulf here can obviously sail to Asia as well. It will take some time, but everybody will be on the hunt for every available barrel of crude oil as we get here into April. So that's why I say that we're definitely not energy insulated.
That's a great observation, and it will help people to understand this. John Kilduff, thank you for being with us and having some fun with us on very serious matters. Thank you so much.
Yes.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.